Hello guys, I hope you're doing well. In the last couple of days, a lot of media and diplomatic hype surrounding the military operation in Idlib. The Syrian army didn't launch the military offensive yet against the latest Al-Qaeda enclave in Syria. However, we are witnessing a lot of opposition by the Western governments to prevent or to slow down the Syrian army operation against the Islamist terrorists in Idlib. However, the most important point in this regard is the issue of the chemical weapons. So for those who don't know or they weren't following the news in Syria, in 2013, in September, the United States was going to strike Syria under the pretext that the Syrian army used chemical weapons in August 2013 in eastern Ghouta. This incident has been by a lot of journalists and investigators been debunked, and it was clear to many observers that the Jaish al-Islam at that time, they conducted this false flag attack in order to invite a foreign intervention, and the Americans were going to bomb Syria. However, at that time there was a deal has been struck between Russia and the United States in order to destroy the chemical weapons of Syria. I remember at that time that the chemical weapons of Syria has been destroyed by the un-American warships in the Mediterranean under the supervision of the OPCW. And I believe in 2014, the OPCW, the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, they declared that Syria has no more chemical weapons, period. But after this, depriving Syria from its chemical weapons, a lot of incidents happened in Syria where the so-called international community of the Western governments accused the Syrian government of using chemical weapons, and lately was in Douma. In Douma, a few months ago, when the incident happened, the Americans, French, and the British came and bombed Syria, right? Yeah. But the OPCW, which visited the place where the alleged chemical attack happened, in their first initial report, they said there was a chlorinated materials, but no chemical weapons. Chlorinated materials could be even in the water that you drink, and because Douma is an agricultural area, so it's very possible that these chlorinated materials were in the water for agricultural needs. However, now in Idlib, the same old scenario, as if we have an old tape and you are just replaying the same tape. I mean, come on. In Idlib now, the Syrian army doesn't have chemical weapons, period. They don't have it. But for an argument's sake, if let's suppose the Syrian army has chemical weapons, and the Syrian army already liberated more than 70% of the Syrian territories. The Syrian army doesn't have another major front against any insurgent groups. So the Syrian army sent all its reinforcement and most of its battalions to Idlib, including the Republican Guard, including the 4th Division, including the Tiger Forces, including the NDF, including the Hezbollah forces, including the Russian Air Force. So, the Al-Qaeda fighters are trapped in Idlib, and the Syrian army is able to liberate this area by conventional weapons. This is obvious to any rational observer. So, how could we save the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Idlib? We raised the issue of the chemical weapons, because in front of the Western audiences, the Western governments have no excuse to bomb the Syrian government or the Syrian government forces. So they are saying now, if a chemical weapon is used in Idlib, we will bomb the Syrian army. First, what if Al-Qaeda used chemical weapons? Are you going to bomb Al-Qaeda, or you just concluded already that it's the Syrian army will use the chemical weapons. You don't have the case. Two, you are sure, and we know that Al Qaeda has chlorine gas, and they used it against the Syrian army, including in Khan al-Assal, I believe in 2012, including in many incidents. Even in Aleppo, they used it against the Kurds in 2015, I believe. So they have the chlorine gas. And Carla Del Ponte, for example, the former UN senior investigator, she said that in some cases the rebels used chemical weapons. And so this is well documented. But two, how would this Western government save their proxies unless there is this pretext? So they are using now this illogical, irrational thing to accuse the Syrian government prior to its happening. The chemical attack didn't even happen, and it could never happen. But they are saying if it happened, then we will bomb the Syrian government forces and we will respond that. So they already concluded who is the perpetrator even before it's happening. This is an invitation to Al-Qaeda. Just do it and we will bomb the Syrian government forces. It's really crazy what's going on in Idlib. And the white helmets are playing a major role in this. And there are many reports from Idlib that they already recorded several plays of alleged chemical attacks. And we know that these militants and the white helmets, they kidnapped a lot of kids, especially from the families who were calling for reconciliation with the Syrian government. So these kids could be used in this alleged chemical attack. We know how dirty they are, and we know that they could do it to accuse the Syrian government for that. But why all this hype now on Idlib? There are several reasons for that. One, Idlib is the last insurgent enclave in Syria. So after Idlib, Syria has no more, it would face no more insurgency from these Islamist forces. This is the last place. Two, what after Idlib? The Syrian army will start focusing on Afrin, on Jarablus, which is occupied by the Turkish proxies, and then on the eastern shores of the Euphrates, where the Americans and the French have occupation forces there. So you can see how the Western governments and Turkey are thinking about this issue. They are thinking what's after Idlib. So they want to keep this area as a hotspot in order to make the Syrian army, to keep the Syrian army busy with these Islamist terrorists in Idlib. There is also another important reason. If the Syrian army bombs this area, thousands of Al-Qaeda fighters, fighters from Uzbekistan, fighters from Chechnya, fighters from Central Asia, fighters from Turkestan, from Western China, the Uyghurs, Saudis, Egyptians, there are thousands and thousands of foreign multinational terrorists, including Syrian radical terrorists. So these fighters could flee to Turkey. And we all know that after Turkey, these fighters there's a huge possibility that they could go to Europe and to Germany in particular. And this is exactly why now the German government raised the issue of we might retaliate and we might bomb the Syrian government in case a chemical attack happened. The German government is worried that if the operation in Idlib started, then thousands of radical jihadists could flee to Turkey and from Turkey to Europe, and then they would be forced to accept them as refugees and give them residencies and so on. So this is one of the reasons why Germany is now interested in an act of aggression against Syria. But also there is another reason, because the Americans are putting pressure on their European partners, because they want them to share the military burden, especially in the NATO. And yeah, so still the Americans have a huge leverage over the European continent, and they are forcing them to act with Washington in an act of aggression against the country which is fighting Al-Qaeda, which the Americans celebrated or commemorated the 9/11 incidents and the terrorist attacks only a few days ago. So instead of helping Syria to destroy Al-Qaeda enclave, they are threatening to bomb Syria, which is fighting Al-Qaeda. It's unbelievable. This was Kevork Almasyan of Syriana Analysis, and see you next time.